Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another video, and as always I hope you're all doing well. So today is a really cool and special day for me, so I thought I'd bring you guys along with me. After flight school I got my first airline job in about October of 2022, and despite it being a few years since then, I've never actually had the opportunity to fly my parents on one of my flights. However, today that is all changing and it's a really exciting day for me. They are currently in Palma de Mallorca having a lovely holiday. And this afternoon I'm getting the opportunity to fly them back, which is really exciting. At the moment it's looking like a really standard day for me. Check-in is about 2 hours from now, so after I record this I'm going to finish up getting ready. But at the moment it looks really all nice and straightforward. Whilst at home here it is blue skies and lovely weather, there is reported to be a few thunderstorms in the area, so maybe a bit of weather avoiding on the departure. However, once we get down to Palma, the weather is gorgeous. Cav day, light winds, so I'm really excited for that. As many of you may or may not know, Gatwick actually has 2 runways, however it only uses one at a time. There is a longer main runway which is used throughout the day, however at 10 PM tonight they're actually closing that runway and switching to the smaller, shorter runway so that they can do works on the southern larger runway during the night. Now, if we're landing on time, we should have no problem and should be on the larger, longer runway. However, at the moment, the aircraft is actually currently delayed due to a slot it had this morning. So fingers crossed, we don't get caught in that runway changes. We could get a little bit of delay, and it's always a pain landing on that shorter runway just because it's not as well lit and the touchdown zones are a bit smaller. That being said, it's still a good sized runway, lots of room to land, so still I'll do my best to do a good landing for my parents. But fingers crossed we can get that larger runway, that way I can just hold the landing off for a little bit longer and try create one of those greases that we were aiming for. But that's it from me for now. If you do enjoy these videos, please remember to like and subscribe. I'm going to go finish getting ready, head to the airport so that I can fly down to Palma to pick up my parents. So guys, all changed and ready to head to the airport, but as I do before every flight, just doing a bit of pre-flight preparation here at home. So when I do arrive at the airport and get to the crew room, I'm ready to brief and ready to get started with the day. I've spoken a bit more about what I do in this pre-flight preparation in a bit more detail in previous videos, but just so you guys get a rough idea, main things I'm checking whilst here at home is firstly the weather, the aircraft as well, making sure there's no defects or things we need to consider for our performance, the NOTAMs throughout the day, and also threats and how we're planning on mitigating those throughout the day. So guys, starting with the weather at Gatwick at the moment, generally throughout the day it's looking really nice, so a good day for flying my parents. It does mention some gusty winds, but that's just a prob 30, so quite a low chance of that happening, but just an idea that there might be some gusty weather within the vicinity of the airport. So we may encounter that, but shouldn't be too problematic. It's just sort of a weather cell passing through the airport. But it's definitely good to be aware that it might be in the area. And then the weather in Palma is absolutely gorgeous. As I mentioned earlier, 35 degrees at the moment. So I'm sure my parents are having an absolutely lovely time, but it looks great in Palma. But as well as those 2 airports, we also look at alternate airports. So today our designated alternate airport is Ibiza. Very similar to Palma, the weather's looking really nice there. So that should be a really suitable alternate should we need it. I'll also check a few airports on our flight route just in case we should need to divert. Of course, the chances of that happening are really slim and we probably won't need to do it. However, it's always good to check the weather and plan for a worst case scenario, even if it's unlikely to happen. And as well as the weather, checking the NOTAMs for all those airports, including Gatwick, Palma, Ibiza, and all those other ones en route, just to make sure if there's any notices or things like work in progress or runway closures, just to see if there's any restrictions for us. A good example of a NOTAM today would be the runway closure later tonight in Gatwick. So we might know that the runway will be closed for about 10 minutes whilst they're switching over to the shorter northerly runway. So we might need to take that into consideration for our fuel decision a little bit later on. But that's sort of the idea of the things we're looking at with NOTAMs. And then also checking our aircraft as well. Checking to see if there's any MEL items or anything performance limiting that I need to be worried about, or any other operational procedures we might have to do if there's anything wrong with the aircraft. But today, aircraft's looking really good, so nothing really to note down. But that's it for my flight preparation at home. Everything's looking really good, so it should be a really exciting day. Time to head to the airport now. Really can't wait to fly my parents, so it should be a really fun day. So guys, just arrived at the car park, about a 5-minute walk to security now, then to the crew room to meet the rest of the crew. Then time to fly to Palma to pick up my parents. So after meeting the crew, we arrived at the gate just as our aircraft was being pulled onto stand. As I was pilot monitoring for the first flight, I started by doing my initial pre-flight checks and then heading down airside to do my walk around, just as all the bags were being loaded, catering was being swapped over. As I was doing my walk around, I also got to see the brand new A321 XLR taking off for one of the first times out of Gatwick. That's a little while ago now as to when this video is being released, but when this video was initially filmed, it was one of the first times it was taking off. With the aircraft set up and all of our checks completed, it was time to close up the doors, push back and start our engines. That's how we started our day out here at Gatwick. And once we had finished the pushback, with both engines nearly finished starting up, the tug detached and we prepared ourselves for taxi. Started by setting the flaps and also a flight control check. So if you're ever a passenger and you can see that happening outside the window with things moving on the wing, that's exactly what we're doing here. Then it was time for our taxi, a very familiar taxi here at Gatwick, of course, just a short taxi as well. As we approached the holding point, we stopped, and it was waiting for our turn to be called. It was a little bit busy this early afternoon in Gatwick, so just had to wait for about 5 minutes, just as other aircraft were taking off and landing. Often, at times in peak season, it can get very congested, as you can imagine in London airspace. Although whilst sitting at the holding point, it was a little bit different to normal because I knew I was going to pick up my parents. All I could do is imagine them just going to the airport right now. So definitely an exciting day for flying. Once it was our turn, we were cleared for takeoff. So lining up on the runway, the captain pilot flying, of course, so he set the thrust. Once we started rolling, making sure all the parameters of the engines are correct. Once we pick up enough speed as well, then it's time to rotate the aircraft once there's enough air going over the wings to produce enough lift to get us into the air. Once there is, the captain eases back on the side stick, bringing the aircraft smoothly into the air for a beautiful takeoff. And with the positive rate of climb, we brought the gear up and we continued on our way. It was a really nice, clear day all over Europe today, so we got really lucky. Had some awesome views all the way down and even on the way back. But on the way down here, some beautiful views of the south coast of England as we made our way down to Palma. A really lucky day for flying. It was just perfect day. The cruise was fairly standard. Both myself and the captain had been to Palma multiple times, knew the island, the approach very well. So there wasn't too much to brief. However, of course, we do a little brief, making sure that nothing's changed, checking the NOTAMs, the weather again. We'll also brief the approach, how I'm going to fly it as well. But we checked the weather, we checked everything at the airport, and there was nothing out of the ordinary. It was looking to be a really simple and straightforward approach into Palma. As we reached overhead Barcelona, it was just about time to start our descent into Palma de Mallorca. Now, at my current airline, we do something what's called a monitored approach. That's where the pilot flying actually becomes pilot monitoring for the descent. And that's to maximise the situational awareness for the whole flight. And then just as we approach the ground, we would switch over controls and the pilot flying for the majority of flight would also do the landing. We would just switch roles just for that descent part. So as I was doing the approach, I had all the flying whilst the captain had the radios beginning our descent into Palma. Again, a really nice clear day, and with not a lot of traffic around, we pretty much knew exactly what air traffic was going to do to us. Give us quite a direct routing, which made descent planning really easy. We then became established on the ILS, or the Instrument Landing System, which is commonly the most often used approach, especially in Europe. Once established and about 1,000 feet overhead the airfield, we switched back over. So I'm pilot monitoring, got the radios for our landing, as our captain does an absolutely awesome job. A really good landing, applying reversers, the spoilers and auto brake arm as well, a really smooth rollout. Taking the most expeditious taxi routing just to minimise our time on the runway. The parking stand we were allocated was the complete other side of the airport, so a little bit of a longer taxi as we taxied all the way round to pick up my parents. Finally parked on stand, and I even got to wave to my parents out the window as they looked in, super excited knowing I was flying them home. I managed to greet them at the door, which was really nice. They even bought some chocolates for the crew, which was a lovely touch. However, with them on board, the actual procedures for myself, of course, do not change. So like normal, set up the aircraft with the aid of the captain and the crew, and it was time to go home. Firstly, just like in Gatwick, we got the tug attached and started our pushback. My parents managed to get a couple videos. Nothing special, but I'll chuck them over the top for your entertainment as well. And you can actually see the overlay of the flight simulator plus the videos that are happening in real life. Starting both engines straight away, as we knew with the long taxi coming into stand, it was going to be a relatively short taxi going out. Often when there's a bit of a longer taxi on the way out, or if it's just a little bit busy and we know we're going to be a while, we can actually start one engine on pushback, which of course is better for the environment but also saves the company money. However, not today, a bit of a short taxi and quite empty. So 2 engines on pushback. As it was such a long taxi in, it was actually quite a short taxi out after pushback. Got some cool clips here from my parents as we taxied down and made our way to the holding point for takeoff. Once we arrived at the holding point, we were pretty much cleared for takeoff straight away. So for the first time, taking off with my parents on board applied to us just as my captain did back in Gatwick here in Palma. A beautiful evening for it, so nothing too difficult. Easy to keep it on the centre line, and after we reached our rotate speed, just like last time, eased back on the controls for a nice smooth rotation to take us into the air. A quick climb, eventually we got into the cruise. With a little bit of time and a very familiar Gatwick with not too much weather around, I had a little break. I managed to pop out into the cabin to say hello to my parents, make sure they were getting treated amazing, which of course they were by our brilliant cabin crew. I also managed to enjoy some dinner with some beautiful views here again of the Spanish coast. A really clear, nice sky, this sort of orange lit in the distance. It was absolutely beautiful. However, being a relatively short-ish flight, not too long after dinner, after a little chat with my parents, it was time to descend back into Gatwick. Just like on the way down, a monitored approach, so my captain did all the flying for our descent, from top of descent to about 1,000 feet. Again, using that instrument landing system to become established. That's the most common way, especially in busier airports. Once we were stable and at 1,000 feet, I took back over control. Heart rate a little bit higher than normal. I think that's pretty fair to say. Of course, with the parents on board, you always want to do that good landing I spoke about at the beginning of the video. Of course, prioritising safety always. However, if I can make it a little bit smoother for them, then why not? So here it comes, the big moment. Weather conditions were pretty good. A little bit of a crosswind to deal with, but generally really nice weather. So I can't complain too much. Flew it down, tried to disconnect the autopilot as early as possible, so I got to hand fly the aircraft for as long as I could with my parents on board. And then finally, the touchdown. What I thought was a pretty good landing. My parents also agreed with me, although I think it's fair to say they are probably a little bit biased. But a really nice landing and a big feeling of relief as that landing occurred, because it's always a little bit nervous when you've got someone you know on board. Definitely want to do a good landing for them. So really glad I did. And then that taxi back in just felt so much more comfortable. And then finally, pulled up onto stand, parking on stand before disembarking, saying goodbye to my parents, although I did meet them straight after security as I was giving them a lift home. So guys, just returned home after what has been such an incredible and memorable day out for me. Super easy flight home, captain and crew were all really nice. Even had a little bit of time in the cruise to head into the cabin and say hi to my parents. And to top it off, the weather in Gatwick tonight was absolutely perfect. Cav with a very slight headwind, which was perfect conditions for a nice smooth landing. And luckily I managed to do a really good one, so I was really happy with that. Got some cute pictures with my parents in the cockpit after the flight as well, which was really sweet. However, now I have to go to bed because I'm flying to Tenerife tomorrow, so yeah, gotta go get some sleep. So guys, all ready for bed and I'm gonna go head to sleep. As always, if you did enjoy today's video, please remember to like and subscribe. It really does help out the channel. And YouTube recommends you're going to like this video here, so why not give that a watch next. But guys, thank you, and I will see you in the next video.